Welcome to Bears on Tap, hosted by Kyle Juice Michalski, Quinten Q Krzysko, Sonny Verma, and the one and only Ron Luce. Bringing you all the news, analysis, and opinions on the charter franchise, Chicago Bears.
The 2-2 Chicago Bears. 2-2. I said it. We're back. Right where I thought they'd be at this point in the season. Just right. Our hosts in the Carolina Panthers this year. The team who is so generous to give us DJ Moore, Tyreek Stevenson, Caleb Williams, among multiple other names. Who else is in there? Was Javon
Darnell Wright.
Darnell Wright. Yeah, he's included in there. Then I think was Zach Pickens the other one?
I believe Zach Pickens was the other one, yes.
There's another name or two in there. But either way, we are not trying to show them gratitude for that this week. We are not trying to do them any favors. We want the Bears to beat this team down. I think it's pretty simple. Like we see Andy Dalton at starting quarterback, and Dalton's been pretty good. Happy Tuesday to everyone out there. If you're listening tomorrow, happy Wednesday. But Andy Dalton's not a game changer to me. And I look at this defense. We'll get into the roster more in a bit, but they are depleted. The Bears should be able to run for 200 yards on this team, even with a poor rushing offense so far this year, with the state of their roster. But before we get too deep into the roster, we always want to start out with a weather report. So they're playing at Soldier Field.
Yes, they are.
And it's looking like it's going to be a little cloudy, 72 degrees, low of 49. Nice day. Beautiful October day in Chicago on the lakefront. I wonder how windy it's going to be, though.
That's a good question, Q, because I think that will – I wouldn't expect it to be unbearably windy. I don't think we're going to see shades of the San Francisco Bears game back in 2005.
I will never forget that one.
Every kick that hits just any bit of air goes immediately the other way. I don't know if we're going to
always think of there was a Kenny Mayne segment about that game where it was because it was one of Robbie Gould's first games in the NFL. And it was Kenny Mayne, it was a jokester over at ESPN. I've tried to find this online and can never find it, but it's this joke segment about how Robbie Gould had this weird kicking technique that they said would never work. And eventually he found a way to make it work. And it's just all these clips of him trying to kick in that wind.
That wind was something, man. To this day, that is some of the worst conditions I think I've ever seen at a football game. But based on what I'm seeing, Q, agreeing with you, I don't really see a whole lot on the wind, but it's going to be a beautiful October Sunday at Soldier Field, and I'm excited to be there. I'll be on the boots on the ground, providing some content for my own account, from the Bears on Tap account as well over on X. It's going to be a beautiful day to be out in Lot B doing some tailgating, and then hopefully talking about a Bears victory after the fact. Can't beat it. Can't beat sunny and 70 in October. I don't care what the date is. As long as it's in October and it's 70 degrees, I'm usually a pretty happy camper. I think the Bears will be too, if that ends up being what the weather pretty much stays as at this point, right? We have hindsight, when our post-game show is done. 5 days. A lot can change in 5 days, as we know, with the weather. But overall, right now, looks beautiful.
Yeah, with a little luck, maybe they'll hit a few deep shots with that nice weather. You never know. It would be nice. It would be nice. But, Ron, before we get too much into the Panthers, we're at the quarter season mark here. 2-2 is that's kind of where I expected us to be. But what are your general thoughts on where the Bears are sitting right now versus where you expected them to be? And how do you feel about all of it?
I think in terms of where we expected the Bears to be, I think, like you said, I think they're right where we expected them to be. Maybe not necessarily by the exact games that they were winning and losing, right? I think we expected them to lose to the Rams and the Texans and beat the Colts and the Titans, and obviously that wasn't 100% the case. We were 50% of the way there. But overall, right there, we knew there'd be growing pains for Caleb. I think anybody that thought he was going to come in and throw 500 yards week one is optimistic. which I think every Bears fan is when it's the turn of a new season, but unrealistic, unfortunately, right? And he's shown moments, he's shown flashes. You and I talked about it on Sunday that even though the numbers weren't there from per se a yard standpoint, right? 360 yards almost against the Colts, only 150 plus against the Rams, but he was efficient. And as soon as those deep throws start to hit, and I'll tell you what, Q, I went back and watched the highlight of that Moore throw where DJ did kind of maybe stop running a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I will say this. If you watched the angle of which that ball kind of fell, it fell more inside, more or less lining up the theory that because college hashes are wider, your throw to the near sideline is more of a straight shot than it is an angular throw, is in the NFL. I think as soon as Caleb just gets used to just the positioning on the field, I think a lot of those will start to hit. So, they've had their growing pains. I think they've had a lot of good things happen on offense, too. It hasn't been all terrible. Yes, there's a lot of frustration around the offense, and I don't think we expected as much frustration maybe at this point through 4 weeks as there currently stands. But I think if you flip it on the other side of the football, Q, I think this is exactly what we were hoping for out of the Bears defense, and they've largely come through. I mean, the most amount of points you give up in a game is to the Indianapolis Colts, and it's 21 points. I mean, I'll take that if the defense is giving up 21 and less. That at least gives you a chance to win every single week when your defense can do that. So overall, I think from a record standpoint, I think it's right on par. I think from a defensive play standpoint, it's right on par. I think the offense has a couple more concerns than we were hoping for 4 games in. But overall, I don't think we're too far off the buck here, Q.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm generally with you there. I think you made a lot of good points. And I think when you are mentioning the stuff about Caleb's downfield throws and stuff, I threw together some numbers today, just looking at, historical rookies. And by PFF grade right now on the deep ball, Caleb Williams is at the bottom of this list. This is like quarterbacks who took 100 plus dropbacks in the first 4 games of the season of their rookie year. But you look at this, Josh Allen was right there with him. Joe Burrow wasn't far off. Joe Burrow only completed 4.5% of his deep attempts in his first 4 games. So he must have just hit like one that was incredible for his PFF grade to be that high, because Caleb's completing quite a bit more than that, which isn't a giant. It's like Caleb hit 2. Joe might have hit 1. Like that, we're talking about really small sample sizes with deep throws, but historically, rookies have kind of struggled. You look at some of this, like Carson Wentz was good at it. Carson Wentz had a great O-line that gave him time for stuff to develop downfield. Minshew, I believe that team actually had a pretty decent O-line too. Wilson, probably not, but Wilson's probably more of an anomaly here. Jameis had a solid O-line and an offense coordinator who just wanted to huck it deep a lot. Herbert is a guy who was probably just different because not a good O-line, and he was just doing it with good wide receivers though. But really though, I mean, I see Carson Wentz, Gardner Minshew, Zach Wilson, Jameis Winston at the top of this list. Deshaun Kaiser's up there. Like, I don't see a bunch of great names up here outside of Herbert and CJ Stroud. Maybe you throw Kyler Murray in there too. But at the bottom, I mean, I see Josh Allen. I see Joe Burrow. I see Deshaun Watson. I see Dak Prescott. I see Trevor Lawrence. I see a lot more good quarterbacks at the bottom, which is a little bit curious. Maybe that's something more about where they went in the draft, or who knows. But I don't think it's anything to be overly worried about at this point. I just wanted to kind of get a gauge for, how good are rookie quarterbacks throwing deep? And from what I can tell, a lot of them aren't very good. Like, these completion percentages are in the dumps for a lot of these guys.
100%. And if you take a look at it too, I mean, look how many of the guys, Caleb is on the higher end of the deep balls, right? Mm-hmm. The more deep balls they throw, inevitably, the less accurate they're going to be. Typically, it's probably because maybe they don't have as great of an offensive line, and so they're just not able to get off an accurate throw. And we've seen that at times with Caleb this season, where the offensive line starts to collapse, and maybe he can't really see, what's going on. I think overall, you look at a guy like CJ Stroud. He only attempted 6.6% downfield. A lot of those other guys under 12%. It was designed.
Very clear designs they knew would work. They were like, this is what we've been planning for all week, this shot. And that's the only deep balls we're throwing all game.
And you know what? I think there was a lot of correlation with those teams too that were really good at it. They had good run games. When Gardner
Yeah.
Minshew was a rookie, Leonard Fournette was still really good in Jacksonville, right? When um
Sorry, I
you
think I
know
just threw you off by sort
you
of.
did, yeah, it's okay. When Carson Wentz, for example, right? Like when he was with the Eagles, they had a good good offensive line, a good run game. So you don't always have to throw downfield. And if you do, it might be off a play action, right? That's a whole nother thing that you have to consider, that it creates more success typically when you can run the football and then you can throw play action downfield. So
Yeah.
I agree with you, right? It's a lot of numbers, it's a lot of data to consume. But then you also have to just consider the situation, what the team around them looked like, what was the situation in terms of just the franchise, right? Most top, highly drafted quarterbacks are typically going to really bad teams, unless you have like a Carson Wentz, where the Eagles went and traded up and gave up a ton to go get him. You can kind of say the same about the Rams, who weren't as bad when, Goff was a rookie. Same, I think, applies for some of the other guys, whereas like you're just pointing right there, Bryce Young. That Panthers offense last year was horrendous. Joe Burrow,
Sam
that
Darnold.
offensive line in front of him was terrible his rookie year. Sam Darnold with the Jets, that team
Guys
was
could have won an MVP this year.
Shit, he might. He might. Hey, he keeps this up. He might. But, it just goes to show, right? A lot of it's, understanding just what's going on. But I think it's interesting to look at and at least understand, because it does tell a little bit of a story of just, hey, based on where the team's at and where, some of these guys are succeeding, you get a feel for, well, what's really going to work for a lot of these guys. And I think the biggest thing that could help Caleb Williams with a lot of this is the play action game, which they got off to a good start with Swift, being more active in the run game this week. I think if they can do that again next week, I think that opens up some of those deep shots downfield.
I hope it does. And just before we move on, I want to just share this a little bit. I toy around with stuff like this whenever there's a rookie quarterback I care about, just like tracking their game by game progress. So, I mean, red means that he's below league average for a starting quarterback in that game. Green means he was above average. We see a lot more green as each game is going, and we see completion percentage ticking up every game, adjusted completions percentage moving in the right direction, yards per attempt moving in the right direction. I mean, a lot of this stuff is pretty encouraging to me. Not a single game over 2.85 time to throw. I think that goes a long way. The one area where I do have a little concern is the pressure to sack rate. I think that will get better with time, but that's something that he's pretty elevated with right now. But the big time throw rate has really kicked up the last 2 weeks, and we're talking small samples, but it's nice to see them after the first 2 weeks, not really seeing them. And the turnover worthy play rate has been going down pretty heavily here. And if you're a PFF grade believer, one of the things that I really find encouraging is this PFF grade against the blitz. He's been above average the last 2 weeks in that category after being well below average the first 2 weeks. So we're seeing rapid growth there against the blitz from him, which is really encouraging to me.
I also think we're seeing growth in the game plan. And I think that's also a good thing to help Caleb succeed and properly develop. I think you're starting to see Waldron maybe get a little more conservative with the offense, which I know is going to drive people nuts. But it's good things for Caleb in terms of his development. Look at Jaden Daniels. You and I talked about it a little bit on Sunday's show. They're keeping the offense really simple for Jaden Daniels and letting him use the tools he has, the big arm, the legs, etc. Caleb has good vision for the field. We're seeing it. He's got the arm strength to make all the throws. Sometimes just giving him more options, especially when you have an offensive line right now who we'll call them suspect for lack of a better term. If he can get away quick throws to open receivers, it's only going to make him more successful and build that confidence. And I think that speaks to a lot of what you're seeing here with the PFF blitz number.
Yeah, I agree. I think that plays a lot into it. And I think one thing that the one other aspect here that's really encouraging to me is this pressure share number. So this is the percentage of his pressures that were self-caused. Week 1, a third of his pressures were at least some fault of his own, according to PFF. Week 2, only 15.8%. So moving in the right direction. Last 2 weeks, PFF hasn't marked him down responsible for any pressures he's taken, which is that is nice for a rookie quarterback. Like that is something that rookies struggle with, especially rookies who did as much freelancing as he did in college.
100%. I think that some of that too is probably just him believing in what he's seeing And I attribute that to, again, positive development moving forward for a guy like Caleb Williams.
Yeah. But moving on, let's talk about the Carolina Panthers, who will be playing the Bears this week. Let's take a look at this roster, see what they're working with here. So they're hurt. Like, they are hurting. Two of their best 3 defensive players are out in Derek Brown and Shaq Thompson. Big losses for their run defense, especially. And that's where I think Thomas Gage was getting at in the comments saying the Bears are going to hang 3 touchdowns on this Panthers defense now without Shaq Thompson. I mean, no Derek Brown, no Shaq Thompson. They're starting a rookie, Trevin Wallace, who I don't believe run defense was really his calling card coming out. I could be mistaken on that, but I can't say I watched a ton of him coming out just because I didn't expect the Bears to draft a linebacker. But I don't think that he would. I thought he was more of a coverage player and like an athletic player than anything, not so much instinctive downhill run lane stuffer. And then I forget this guy's first name, Chirillis. I don't know anything about him, if I'm being frank. And you look at their D line. Last week they were missing Shy Tuttle on top of Derek Brown, so they were missing 2 of their top probably 3 defensive tackles. They still got Ashawn Robinson there, who's a load, and they still got Jadeveon Clowney out there, who you always have to account for him. But outside of that, on this D line, there's not a lot to really be that worried about.
No, there's really not. And I think, too, it just speaks to how important Derek Brown is to that defense. I would argue that Derek Brown's an even more important player to the defense than Shaq Thompson is. And I think you've seen that over the course of Shaq Thompson's career. He does get banged up a little bit. Derek Brown is that dude, in my opinion, on that Panthers defense right now. And, you know, it's really, really tough, especially after you lose Dante Jackson. They send him to Pittsburgh. Obviously, you got a big piece in return in Deontay Johnson on the other side of the football, but you lost a really good cornerback who's having a really strong start to the season out there in Pittsburgh at the corner spot. You know, they lost some things to get some things, but I agree with you, man, especially with the number of injuries that have loaded up against their defense. It makes you kind of sit there and, you know, rub your hands together and lick your lips a little bit about the run game this week, where maybe if they just commit to the power game, commit to the inside run, and just try to just bury forward for 4 yards of play, some good things are really going to happen, I think, at Soldier Field this weekend.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how they attack this defense. I think there are ways to attack it. I don't know if trying to go true drop back all game is really a great strategy against this team, because J.C. Horn is pretty good. I believe it's Mike Jackson has had a really nice year outside at corner for them as well. And Hill isn't a bad option in the nickel either. So they do have a pretty stout corner room, but that interior, I don't know why you would attack anything else. So that I think the game plan should be pretty clear this week. But defensively, I am a little worried about this offense. Like, I do think they can do some things. I think Deontay Johnson is a heck of a football player. I think Xavier Legette was extremely interesting coming out of college this year. I thought there were a lot of red flags in his profile, but at the same time, he was like 6'3", 220 and could jump over buildings. So he was one of those guys that just like, he might just be one of the toughest dudes to stop one-on-one if his head's right. Or not even head's right. Like, that probably gives a bad connotation to him, but like if he's figuring it all out. But I see their O-line too. Like they added Austin Corbett, Robert Hunt, and Damian Lewis this offseason. Damian Lewis is out. Those are all 3 interior offensive linemen. They completely refurbished their interior, and it's shown. They've run the ball well this year, but without Damian Lewis, they are going to have a tough spot there with Christian Zavala starting at left guard.
And I think, too, this highlights the importance of a guy like Javon Dexter this week, because more likely than not, and even Andrew Billings being healthy, right? I think Andrew Billings is on a tear right now. He's starting to get some national love from people just seeing how dominant he can be. That's going to be a mismatch for those 2 inside guys. I think taking advantage of a young guard, especially when you don't have your big money guard in there, Damian Lewis. But you look at the rest of that offensive line. I'll tell you what, Q, there's one thing I know about O-line play. It's you can have 1 weak O-lineman, maybe 2, and you can still find a way to play really good offensive line play because you can cover those guys up. So I fully expect this offensive line to still have a good game. I think it's going to challenge the back seven of the Bears defense. I think because Andy Dalton, has been largely successful in his 2 games as the starting quarterback. They've had a lot of success with Chuba Hubbard. I think if they can shut down the run game, at least minimally, and force the Panthers to pass or get creative in the passing game, I think that's where it's going to really come to fruition for the Bears defense and benefit them, because you're going to force Andy Dalton to put the ball in much, much, much tougher spots.
Yeah, and Mike in the comments saying, look at 6'3", 225, runs a 2.34. I think he meant a 4.3, but guy's
he big and fast
physically. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I like that you mentioned Javon Dexter there, because one thing I have noticed this year, all Dexter snaps are coming over the right guard, it seems like. And all of Billings' snaps are on the left side, over the left guard. Like from 0 technique out to like 4 technique, left side, right side. Like Billings has always been to the left. Dexter's always been to the right when they're on the field together, at least.
Right.
And that's the versatility that we've seen Dexter kind of develop to be able to kick into the one tech, and the side is what they play now, because they feel comfortable with both these guys playing 3 or 1, or, anything in between 4 and 1, I guess I should say. But that really, I love that, because I can sit here and have all the snaps that Andrew Billings is out there. He can pound on the kid who's not as good. He doesn't, it's not a worry about, well, we need him playing the one tech over here. We think they're going to run into the strength of the formation, so we need him on the strong side. It's like, no, they don't need to do that anymore like they did last year, which is just really nice in my opinion.
Yeah, and like you said, I think it's a testament to how much growth Javon Dexter has gone through. And again, it allows you to play further into the scheme, right? Because there's not a lot of time pre-snap, right? There's not a lot of ability to move guys around as you need to after, a linebacker's trying to read what the play is and know their own responsibilities. When you can just tell your line to shift and they can just play their sides, it makes everybody's life easier on the defense, on the coaching staff, et cetera, when guys can just easily bounce back and forth and move up and down the defensive line.
Yeah, and Ron, so now that we have gotten into some of the meat of this roster and discussed it a little bit, let's move on to our next segment.
The baddest man.
Ron, when you look at this roster, who's the first player that you look at and you say, that's a bad man right there? Like that's a man who can end a game right there.
Yeah, I think the easy answer, especially right now, is Deontay Johnson. And you saw it, right? When they get the ball in his hands over the last 2 weeks with Andy Dalton at quarterback, he has been a consistent producer. For those that play fantasy football, he's giving you 20-plus fantasy points each week, right? He's getting in the end zone. He's putting up multiple catches for, good numbers offensively. To me, he's the guy that creates the biggest mismatch, in my opinion, against the defensive secondary for the Bears, especially with no Adam Thielen, who just is a smart, savvy veteran receiver that understands spacing well. I think you can take advantage, even with the big league and even Mingo, who's got good size. I think you can take advantage of some of their inexperience against them in the defense. But Deontay Johnson's been around the block. He knows what he's doing. He's a Pittsburgh receiver disciple of that group. They just churn out Pittsburgh, receivers in Pittsburgh. So I like Deontay Johnson. To me, on this entire roster right now, that's the baddest dude that I'm a little concerned about come Sunday.
Yeah, I think that's a good choice. And I think especially with how the Bears have been running their cover 3 looks this week or this year, and they've ran a good amount of cover 3, but they've been pretty soft in it. Like they're not as aggressive. They're backed off the line. They're kind of letting stuff come to them as opposed to attacking. And that's the type of defense that I think Deontay Johnson has the opportunity to really or has the ability to tear up, like the less attacking defense that lets him get into his routes easily. I think you start to jostle him a little more, get more physical with him. That's where his physical abilities might not be as good as his skill. I guess his talent isn't as good as his skill. So he needs when you can give him that little step from the talent standpoint, he can really take advantage of you with his skill. By skill, I mean route running. I mean technique. By talent,
Right.
I mean, being 6'3" with a 4.3 40 and 225. Like there's a difference there. So I think Johnson is the clear guy. On offense, for me, as the baddest man, though, I'm going Chuba Hubbard. Excuse me, Chuba. Chuba Hubbard has 290 yards over the last 2 games. He's been on one. That's rushing plus receiving. Like, he runs hard, gets nasty with it. He will break tackles. He has enough juice to make you to be dangerous, and they're going to use him. They're going to use him out of the backfield. They're going to use him in the run game. They went and paid these hogs up the middle. They're not afraid to hand the ball to Hubbard and say, go run hard like you do. Like, he's almost a little reminiscent of a mini David Montgomery to me with the way that he runs. Like, just very physical, going to get every inch he can. Might have a little more juice than Monty did, but doesn't have the same type of size that Monty did. Like, that was really something that made Monty a little different. So for me, I'm going Chuba Hubbard. And on defense, who are you thinking for baddest man, Ron?
Well, the easy choice is unfortunately not playing, and that would have been Derek Brown, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. Just is a guy that can flip a game on its head from that spot. And although J.C. Horn's a good corner, he has had his struggles this year. He's been beat on some deep routes this year when he's matched up against speed. I think right now I gotta still give love to the guys on the inside. To me, A'Shawn Robinson's a load, and that's a bad dude. Like, there's a reason he maybe only takes a 1 or 2 year deal, but keeps getting more money every time he hits the free agent market, because he's a skill set that not a lot of defensive linemen have. He can play outside in their base package, which is, a more traditional 3-4 look. He can play that 5 technique end spot. And then in base, he can bounce inside and he can play the 1 or the 3, no matter where you need him to play. So I think A'Shawn Robinson he's a guy that I really wanted the Bears to add at one point in time over the last couple of years for some depth. I think he's just a really, really good football player. And to me, again, especially with a suspect offensive line right now here in Chicago, I think he's the type of guy that can really be a game wrecker from the inside. And that's why he's my baddest man choice.
A'Shawn Robinson, I just want to point this out. A'Shawn Robinson has been 40 years old since he was 18. This is him at Alabama.
That's a grown ass man
at Alabama. Like, he is a scary man. Like, very good at stopping the run, very good, just massive. So I love that choice. Like, I think one of the bright sides of him being the baddest man here, though, is he's only going to be on the field like maybe 40% of snaps. So that's nice. He doesn't bring you much from a pass rush standpoint, but he's a load in the run game. A lot to deal with there. And for me, J.C. Horn is still a bad man. J.C. Horn, he might have gotten beat a few times. He's still a really good football player when he's on the field and tough to beat. But I'm going Jadeveon Clowney. We all know Jadeveon Clowney. We all remember the hit at South Carolina. Like, I mean, it was just, the guy's different. His production has been up and down his whole career. I'm actually not even sure how he's done in Carolina so far, but doesn't matter. This guy can stop the run. He can play every down. He's never had an issue generating pressure and stopping the run. The only issue has been sack production. So, like, to me, he's the one guy in this defense that I go, can't really stop him from what he does. It's just that what he does might not be quite as scary as some of the bigger sack men in the league, but when it hits a little better than usual, though, he's right up there with anyone. Like when he just elevates that tiny bit from a really good pressure guy and run stuffer to a guy who is getting sacks, which can be any given game. He's that talented, long arms, big. Like, he's the Xavier Legette of the edge rushers, honestly. But he's a tough man to stop. And Darnell Wright, if he's on the right side, Darnell Wright's going to have a tough time with him. But, like, I think Darnell has the skill set to do it. If I'm Carolina and if I'm having him play both sides, I'm putting Clowney on Braxton, because I want his long arms getting into Braxton's chest instantly and pushing him back, because I think if I'm the Carolina coaches and I'm watching the Rams tape, I saw that they were crush rushing Caleb over and over with really good success, and I'm trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, incredibly well said. They need to get something from the Hogs that are left on that defensive front. And right now, like you said, I mean, from a pure pass rush standpoint, Cloud is the best guy that they've got.
Good point from Thomas here. It's a must-win game for the Bears because it helps their draft pick status.
Sure does.
That's they got Carolina's second-round pick next year. That is a real way to win into a better draft pick. But now that we've talked baddest man, let's get to the next one.
The nicest man.
Ron, who's helping you move out of your new place?
I'll tell you what, the puppy is going to get me every single time. And Q, I want to sit here and be like, well, you can kind of pick your poison, right? I think on the offensive side of the football, though, the guy that scares me the least is Jonathan Mingo. I don't think he's done anything. He is a high draft pick. He was a second rounder out of Ole Miss. They had a lot of expectation for him. Obviously, that offense was not good last year, so you kind of give him a free pass. But when they invested a second rounder in him, you would think they would say, okay, this is our guy. He's going to be involved in the game plan some way, somehow. And instead, they had Adam Thielen still, but they went out and got Deontay Johnson, and they drafted Xavier Legette, right? They added two receivers to that room because they had little faith with Jonathan Mingo. He's the nice guy that you're asking to get you some food because you don't want to pay for DoorDash. He's the guy. He's the nicest man right now on that offense. If he's out on the football field, and I'm the Bears defensively, I'm not terribly scared of a guy like Jonathan Mingo.
Yeah, I think that's well put, and he's a good choice here. Like I think that Mingo was always more about his measurables and his what ifs than about anything he actually did on a football field. So that's a good choice, but for me, offensively, I've got to go Chandler Zavala. I already talked about him a little bit. There were some people who really liked Zavala in the draft last year and really pushed him. I wasn't overly impressed with his tape at NC State. I thought that his best tape came when he was playing next to Ike Ekwonu the year before Zavala came out because they were teammates at NC State. And I thought his play dipped a little bit in his final year after Ekwonu went near the top of the draft. And he's dealt with back injuries. He's had some issues injury-wise that limited him last year, kept him off the field after becoming a starter fairly early. And I don't know. I mean, he has some anchor. He has some stuff to like on his tape, but he was sold as a really good move blocker, and I just never saw that. So it made me question, what is he good at then? If I'm not seeing what everyone is saying he's good at, then I don't know what he's good at, because I don't think he's bad per se. He was a really weird draft eval for me because it was I don't think he's bad at a lot of it, but I just don't know what he hangs his hat on. I don't know what he really does well, which I have to think goes the wrong direction in the NFL.
Yeah, he's okay at a lot of things, but he's not great at any one given thing. And sometimes you will get drafted just based on being really good at one thing. And maybe they know, hey, you're not the greatest pass protector, but we can work with you there. But you're a run grader in the run game. Teams are willing to take that risk on a guy who's maybe a little more one dimensional because you already know what you're getting in that one phase of what they do well, and then you can work on that secondary phase to at least bring it up to average. Which more often than not gets you by in the NFL.
Yeah, and I just pulled it up. So he came in midway through the Vegas game in week 3 for them. Played well in pass pro, but only 5 pass pro snaps. The rest were run blocking, had a okay-ish run block grade, and started against Cincinnati. Played excellent in pass pro against Cincinnati, had a 78.1 PFF grade, but his run blocking was at 56.1, on par with the previous game. And last year, he played 370 snaps. He had a pass block grade of 7.1. So, I question whether it was just Cincy's interior that gave him a good pass block grade, because
Could be.
In the third game of the year, he only played 5 pass block snaps. So his first real sample of pass block snaps this year was against Cincy. And I know that interior is dealing with some stuff right now. So I just think that's a spot you can attack on this offense and feel really good about. You can, throw some stunts, throw some blitzes his way. He's still pretty green to the NFL. Like, make him sort stuff out, because you also know Iquanu is not the best at sorting stuff out. Iquanu's a really good run blocker, and he's gotten better this year, but as a pass blocker, but he's still not a really strong pass protector mentally or just process wise.
Yeah, well put. There's a lot to be said about youth on the offensive line, especially when guys are still trying to learn the position. And you got a really young left side of this offensive line that maybe the Bears can take advantage of.
Now, defensively, Ron, who's driving you to the airport?
You know what? I'm so honored because I think there's about 6 different guys on this defense that would do that for me. Take a pick here. I'm going to just go with linebacking row in general, because I think the absence of Shaq Thompson is just really going to hurt them. A lot of inexperience at the linebacking position. To me, they're the nicest guys. You get through that first level and first wave of defensive linemen, and I think you got some good matchups in the secondary, whether it's Roshan Johnson or whether it's DeAndre Swift in the run game. I think you have a lot to be said there for the mix and match that the Bears can put at you in the run game from a committee at running back standpoint. I'll just go with linebacking row, Q. I think they both would be nice enough. They'd be both so nice that they would even take you out for lunch too before dropping.
Yeah, I mean, so talking about Trevin Wallace, I just pulled up Zerline's scouting report because I didn't watch enough of him to really form any opinion, like I mentioned earlier. But Zerline said, height, weight, speed prospect with explosive physical traits, but major issues with consistency. Wallace looks the part and can run and hit when he's locked in. However, he struggles to diagnose and execute his responsibilities at a standard NFL level. Teams will take traits and his potential to play special teams, but he will need to prove he can play with better instincts and recognition to make it in the pros. So that sounds like a guy who you attack with misdirection. You attack it like you run right at him, and then you run the same looks for PA. You're running routes right over where he was. Like that, to me, it sounds like a guy that you can get stepping forward. And with the other linebacker here,
Chawden Shareless, I believe is how you say his name.
Yeah, and I know. I mean, I don't even know if there is a draft profile of this guy. He was undrafted in 2023. Let's see. He's played a total of 9 offensive snaps, 9 defensive snaps all this year, and 2 offensive snaps. One this year, one last year. So, I mean, I'm not seeing a NFL.com scouting report on him, and I don't think live on the air is the time to go digging around for one. But that's got to be my nicest guy, just based on he has barely seen the NFL field. Like, Wallace is a rookie, but he was a 3rd-round pick who has seen the field a little bit more than Trellis, and, has the physical abilities. We're sure of that. Maybe Trellis is just as physically gifted as Wallace. I just don't think he'd be undrafted if he was. So, to me, that's a guy who you can attack. That's a guy who you go after in any given way. I mean, I'm sure the Bears have some scouting reports on him that they can pull up. It's a big part of the draft process for NFL teams is not just scouting for who you're picking, but that's where your scouting report for your opponents come from. Like that's how you build the idea of where you can attack different players, how their strengths, their weaknesses. It all starts with that draft scouting report. So I assume the Bears have one on him and know how to attack that. I can't sit here and tell you guys I know how, because I've never seen the guy play.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I think that position specifically, especially because there's no Shaq Thompson and you lost Frankie Louvu to free agency now to Washington. I mean, what was once, in my opinion, a Panthers' strength for this upcoming week has quickly become probably their biggest weakness.
Yeah, absolutely. But now that we've talked about the players, let's talk about how the Bears win this game.
Keys to victory.
Ron, what do the Bears got to do to win Sunday? outside of, give you good press access and maybe some sideline passes.
Hey, that would be pretty sweet. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. You know what? I think they need to keep it simple. I really do. I think that's the easiest way to go about it right now. Keep it simple. And what I mean by keeping it simple, run downhill in the run game, where we're talking about the nauseating weakness in the middle of this defense, specifically on the defensive front and in the linebacking group. Go ahead and pound the rock. Let these big hogs of offensive linemen that you have just be bulldozers. And when you get successful, especially with a Roshan Johnson delivering big hits at the end of runs, DeAndre Swift, who, albeit not the biggest guy in the world, is not afraid to run hard. And then that's when Caleb gets his shots downfield. That's when you can try to hit the man beaters against the JC Horn with a DJ Moore, right? You hit him with that play action. You hit him with that just misdirection, counter, whatever it is that you need, but keep it simple. Don't overthink this. You don't need to run screen on the first play of the game. Just run the football and run it hard, run power, and make sure this defense knows that you are trying to put up 200 rushing yards on them over the course of the whole day. Because I mean, let's be real. If the Bears put up 150 plus rushing yards as a team, I think they win this game easily because A, it's going to control the clock. B, you're going to get that defense as much rest as humanly possible. And C, if you do have to punt the football, you got Torrey Taylor doing it. So plenty of opportunity, but it all starts on the offensive play calling. And to me, keeping it simple, especially in the run game, is exactly what they need. So I'm actually going to kind of recycle something that you said last week, Q. Keep it simple, Shane.
Yeah, I love it. And looking it up, Panthers week 1 gave up 180 rush yards to the Saints. A lot of people have given up a lot of rush yards to the Saints, though. And the Chargers, 219 rush yards. Raiders struggled against them with only 55 rushing yards, but the Bengals got 141 rushing yards. And the Bengals are not, I wouldn't say they're a great running team by any means either. So I definitely think there's opportunity for the Bears to get plenty on the ground this week. And my first key of the game was very similar to what you said. So I'm just gonna kind of repeat that, but not reuse it. I call it feel the power. Get downhill with your runs and take advantage of this depleted Carolina defense and try to turn that into some play action deep shots and see if you can get Caleb's rhythm right on the deep ball, because I think that is important going forward, that you get him feeling that deep ball, that measuring stick. I think this is a week where you have a real opportunity to do it because you have such an opportunity to get the ground game going. Next key for me was keeping Chuba in check. Chuba. I always say Chuba. Chuba Hubbard. Keep him in check. Like I mentioned earlier, 290 yards over the last 2 weeks. As he goes, this offense goes. That's the way it was last year. It's probably the way it was 2 years ago. When Chuba is going, this offense can score points. When you start shutting him down and you make Andy Dalton beat you from the pocket, I think you have a better shot. Now, don't get me wrong there. I think Andy Dalton can beat you from the pocket. I just think it's a lot harder without a good run game for him because he's going to be a field general who needs the running offense to help give him looks. He won't create looks for the rushing offense.
Yeah, I think that's fair, especially at this point in his career, right? You can make the argument when he was a younger quarterback, there was a little bit more mobility and he probably could extend the play a little better. Now they have the offensive line certainly to keep him upright and keep him scanning the field. But I agree with you. And this is any quarterback, right? When you have the power of the run game, and especially a guy like Hubbard, who's been incredibly effective in the first 4 games of the season so far, I'm curious to see how that persists. And this is more just a me as a football fan question. Once a Jonathan Brooks returns to the rotation when, later this season at some point, and my fantasy teams are desperately waiting for that moment, Q. But I mean, it's gone to show that, they have their most success offensively when they get that run game going. If you can make them a little more one-dimensional, I agree with you. Andy Dalton becomes, a little bit, I don't want to call him a lame duck because that's not really what he is. I would never say that, but he's a much easier target to get to when it's all said and done.
So for the third key, I mean, I didn't actually have time to come up with a very clear one on this. So I think we need to brainstorm it here on air because I'm trying to think what stops Andy Dalton historically. Like, is it the blitz? Is it pressure? Is it? I mean, obviously, you can say interior pressure about so many quarterbacks, so I hate to go with that one, but I mean, I'm looking at this, and it looks like historically when he's been blitzed, he's had years where he's been fine with it, but for more often than not, it seems like he's had some issues, and maybe some of that comes down to receiver, but I think it's going to be, for me, I'm thinking something along the lines of timely blitzing, effective blitzing.
I think we could call it Eberflus's whiteboard. And that is get creative in your defensive looks and how you utilize the blitz. Because one of the first things I was thinking about, Q, when you look at how well this offensive line has performed already for Carolina this season, is how are you going to get pressure on Andy Dalton if the front four just doesn't always get there? And to me, it's going to have to be by these timely blitzes that you mentioned and getting a little bit creative. Does a Jaquan Brisker maybe sneak down into the box and come on a delayed blitz, and a Tremaine Edmonds flies out and tries to play a little bit more of kind of that, deep zone look. Do you bring a corner blitz? Maybe Kyler Gordon, who's had a lot of success coming from the nickel spot, knowing you can get a Tremaine Edmonds length out into the flat quick enough, to, in the event of a quick throw from Dalton, maybe create a turnover. I think that's where they really need to get creative. We also saw them do a lot of good stuff in getting creative with kind of some of the double mic blitzes in the middle, kind of the twists and stunts with Edwards and Edmonds. I think there's a lot that can be done there as well. Again, the up the middle is going to be, to me, their path of least resistance when it comes to blitzing as well. Get a Tremaine Edmonds involved who's shown he can blitz. Maybe we get to see a little TJ Edwards in that role as well. And I think a little Kyler Gordon off the edge wouldn't be the worst thing in the world either. But I agree with you. So Eberflus's whiteboard, I think, is a good way to put it, where, sometimes you just got to drop a blitz in the dirt and see if it works.
I love that. I love that phrasing of it, Eberflus's whiteboard, because as I'm sitting here thinking about it, it's probably going to be similar to what we saw against the Browns last year with Joe Flacco at quarterback. You're not tricking Andy Dalton very often, right? He's seen it all. So you need to be creative. You need to give him looks he's never seen, and you need to create possibilities in his mind of what could be happening, because the more possibilities he can imagine, the more likely you are to succeed, right? That's the more he has to think about. That's the more he has to think about, like, how am I going to do it? If they're doing this, how am I going to beat that? Like, so be creative, be different with what you're doing out there. And I thought the Browns game last year, Eberflus did a lot of that. When you go back and look at it, he got really creative with TJ Edwards at times. They were able to get home because of the way that they structured the blitz packages, the pressures, Andrew Billings dropping in coverage happened a few times.
I remember that.
Which everyone wants to roll their eyes at and go, that's dumb, but it works sometimes too. Like, it's that you can confuse these guys into thinking there's no one there, and next thing you know, you got Keith Traylor running 60 yards. Like, it's a beautiful thing.
It's a beautiful thing.
We have Mike in the comments asking if Billings is playing. I haven't seen any injury reports yet. I would assume he played last week. He's probably going to play again this week. I'll tell you what. If Andrew Billings doesn't play, the Bears' run defense is in trouble almost any given week. So I hope he's playing, because I don't want to see Chris Williams or Byron Coward out there trying to play nose tackle, because that's what the Panthers will do to you if they're out there. They'll motion so Javon Dexter can't play the one tech, which he's not necessarily strong at either way, but like, he's passable. But I don't think Chris Williams or Byron Coward are passable at one tech, so they're going to force you into doing that. But yeah, I love that key. Eberflus's whiteboard. That's perfect. That's right up my alley. Now, Ron, how do you see this thing going down?
Well, I see the Bears winning. I do. I know you want a score prediction? I think I got one for you. I think it's going to be nothing special. I don't know what the over-under is right now. I'm willing to bet it's probably right around where I would expect it to be. I could see this being kind of like a 24-21 type game, maybe a 24-20 type game, something of that, and maybe 24-17 type game. Like, I think the Bears pile 3 in. I think it was well said a little bit earlier by Thomas Gage in the comment section, they should be able to take care of business and at least get 3 scores on this Panthers defense. I've got probably about a 24-20 final with the Bears taking it, especially being at Soldier Field as well.
Man, I'm having a hard time thinking about what the Panthers are going to be able to do offensively in this one, if I'm being honest. Last year when they played Seattle and Andy Dalton started, they put up 27 with a much worse team. So that's something. Andy Dalton was performing well with different coaching staff and all. Put up 36 against the Raiders 2 weeks ago, only 24 against the Bengals last week. I don't think either of those defenses are anything to write home about. The Raiders I liked their D-line to start the year, but they've been banged up and not right. So, man, I'm going to say Bears get 27. I think the Bears have a defensive score in there somewhere or something fluky or weird. I think they're going to create some turnovers, create some havoc on defense. And I just don't think this defense is very good. I think they're going to struggle stopping the Bears. To give me Andy Dalton, put it up 21. 3 touchdowns. I think young head coach, young progressive offensive head coach, and go for it on 4th down more. I don't think he's going to kick field goals like when he maybe could be putting points on the board. Give me 3 flat touchdowns. Bears 27, Panthers 21.
I like it. I like it a lot.
And we have a prediction in the comments. Mike saying 20-13 Panthers. Interesting take. But we know he's a Bajan guy. We know he wants Tyson out there. So we'll see if that happens. But until next time, Ron, what do you say we get out of here the only way we know how?
Bear down, my friend.
Bear down.